which is our first question, our first bucket, has played a huge role, I think, in where we are today in terms of our African American males and the success or lack of success that has been shown. If you really look at the whole, if you think about Africa, you know, many of our men were kings and they were part of ruling an empire. And then when the Middle Passage happened and we get to slavery and Jim Crow, it made it very difficult for the African American male to be the protector and provider for his family, not being able to protect his wife or his children, being separated. All of those things really play, I think, a critical role into where we are today. You think about education, this whole education of not being educated, not being able to read, and then the whole separate but not equal piece. And then today, making sure that many of our African American men graduate. A lot of them are not. If you look at the graduation rate, it's much lower for African American men and Latino men than it is for the rest of the population. When you also are looking at history and historical perspective and public policy, you really are starting to look at how folks got jobs, who was doing the hiring, and what kinds of jobs people could get. You're also looking at the whole welfare public policy that really disencouraged families from being together and African American men having to be on the outside. You're also looking at the whole disproportionate minority confinement, our whole juvenile and criminal justice systems that are in place that have had negative, devastating impact on our families in our community, and the whole 3 strikes you're out public policy, which is not my favorite at all. And then you look in terms of poverty and racism, and you put all of that together, and it's really kind of how we are where we are today and having this discussion. So I'd like to really kind of pose this question. Historically, public policy and institutional racism has gotten in the way of us moving forward. So how can we overcome these barriers? How can we as a community or individuals overcome these negative impacts of public policy? So which one of my panelists, esteemed panelists, would like to take that on initially?
I think I'll start.
Okay.
It's interesting, you've kind of outlined a litany of public policy kind of laws or public policy initiatives that were really targeted towards keeping black males in their place or subjugating them to a level that would not allow them to take their rightful place as leaders in their homes, leaders in their communities. So when we talk about that, we have to look at the whole system of our country and how it operates. Our first report that we did for Policy Bridge was untapped potential. And we looked at the untapped potential of black males because we were challenged by the idea that everything you hear about black males in this society is that they're a drain on our resources, they're non-productive, they're more prone to crime, all of the negative pathologies that you could associate with any class of people get associated with African American or black males. So we have to unbundle, in my opinion, the public policy and the narrative that predates that public policy that says that there's something inherently wrong with a person if he's of color and he's a male. And that's a difficult thing to do because that's embedded in our psyche. And that's embedded in how we operate and what we think and what we do and how we even think about it. It's almost when a black male succeeds, it's only, people kind of act like, well, that's not supposed to happen, as opposed to that being a natural part of the process of development for any individual. So I think first of all, we got to create a different narrative. And that means everybody involved has to start to, first of all, question their motivations about why they support the existing narrative. Then they have to start to question whether that narrative is allowing them to be in some superior position that allows them to continue to be in a position of superiority beyond those of males of color. And I think thirdly, we have to be honest and true with ourselves. We all have biases, we all have prejudices. To what degree do those biases and prejudices lead us to oppress others, especially black males?
Thank you, Greg. Sonia?
Lisa. Well, first I want to say I'm entering this conversation not only as an educator, and as the current director of the Promise Neighborhood Initiative for the Sisters of Charity, but also as a mother, a wife, a daughter, and a sister. And so I've been traveling this journey of Black malehood with those people that I love and that are dearest to me. I think, you mentioned a very important piece in your comments when you talked about context. In our work in the Promise Neighborhood, the context is really the neighborhood itself. And the engagement in that neighborhood, not only with residents and the many partners and service providers that are there, and really utilizing that as a way to, I think, tap into that narrative that's lingering in the background. Our focus is on the Central neighborhood. Central is a very historic neighborhood, and pretty much anybody that lives in Cleveland has a tie back to that neighborhood, whether you're Black, white, female. You have a tie back to that community. And so I think a part of our work is also to lift up that positive narrative that exists and that is still there. It's a community where you've got our current mayor living. It's a community where some of the greatest men to really represent African American men in this country grew up and have their roots. You think about the Stokes brothers. So how do we lift up that narrative and we make that the commonplace and the common conversation when we're working with our men and our boys and all the other people who are associated with helping to deal with some of these challenges?
Thank you, Sonia. Ken?
I'd like to just kind of touch on what both Greg and Sonia said. Was I think the dealing with the policies that prevent opportunity and access are what's important. I think though if we look at history, we've seen instances where we've already overcome some of those barriers. So one, while we know there are barriers, we know that there's also a history of overcoming them. And I think just realizing that is important. And it's something actually Sonia and I were talking about before. It's once we overcome those access and opportunity barriers, what are the supports that are needed? And that's where I think the new direction of policy could really be. What are the supports needed in order now to achieve the outcomes? So if we can get the opportunity, we get access, now how we increase the outcomes that we want in the community. And I like to see more programs focused on Black male achievement that are really focused on the outcomes of increasing those graduation rates, lowering those incarceration rates. It needs help. None of us have gotten where we are without support and help from others.